Going to have kind of the dark side of the outside in traveling, but the reason that we have decided to have this committee of the whole meeting at 5 o'clock is for public input and for a chance for us to get our items that we want to discuss as a board. It's not an official board meeting, but it's a committee meeting. And so we're going to start with comments. And tonight I would just say that the folks who have comments this evening, we appreciate you coming and we will accept them. The first comment will be submitted by a concerned citizen, but she feels that she would rather have it read, and so Commissioner Deschamps volunteered to read her comments.
Okay.
Excuse me, Jenny, we may not know each other. I'm Sherry Lynn Skook. I didn't introduce myself.
Okay, sure.
The anonymous.
Yeah. Thanks, Bobby.
Okay, here's Sherry's thing. The incomplete list of commissioner appointments voted on at a previous meeting contains 79 entities requiring commissioners' presence at their meetings. That was the first one. What is the criteria for having county board representation at a meeting? How much is paid to the commissioners for attending a meeting? Is there a difference between local and out-of-town per diem? Does the commissioner provide feedback to the county board after attending a meeting? Would it be feasible for some of the local committees to come to the county board or as needed basis rather than have a county commissioner attend all their meetings?
Okay. And do we have any other public comments, concerns?
What? Can we just, Madam Chair, if I could, can we just answer those questions?
I've just one.
Those would be, Brady, can you address the per diem? Because it's just numbers, right?
Yeah, the per diem's $100 and it's the same whether it's in county or out of county.
So whether it's the cemetery committee or ARDC. Okay. And does like ARDC or corrections, do they ever reimburse you?
There's at least a couple of committees that, because of joint powers,
Uh-huh.
and so they pay everybody, and commissioners, they either turn it in, they don't accept the,
Oh, okay.
either turn it in or they don't accept the county portion, so they only get one.
Mhm. But they do get for in-county and others too.
It's the same, and I remember when the discussion, when it changed, they used to have different rates. And then there was a kind of an honor system that they would try and combine as many as they could,
Mhm.
if it was in county,
Thank
to
you.
the degree it's feasible.
The criteria question, can that be answered?
Sure.
Well,
Jimmy, just a little more detail on that. It's one per day. So I might have 4 committees that I
But you-
attend in a day. I get one
You
per
get
diem.
one per diem.
Right.
Okay,
And I have to prove that I was at the meeting, and we provide the minutes.
okay, that was.
Some committees require a commissioner in their bylaws. Some of them, for me, some of the committees I've been on, like there's funding that we've had for the airport, it's important that a commissioner's there. And that does come to the county board, and there's presentations, and then, so this covers the criteria. So that's a lot of it, and the ones when we went through at the beginning of this year, Myron was newly elected at the beginning of last year, Bobby came in midterm, and there's some where there was one where like, I don't know if they've met in a while, and we checked on it, and the bylaws for that committee do require that a commissioner's on it. So when we're asking questions, is it 2, is it area regional corrections, alternates where they have 2 commissioners from a county, and then the next year it's 2 commissioners from another county, and that's the requirements of that committee. And we do give funding to that organization as a county as part of our budget, so it's important for us to be at the table to know what they're spending that money on. And that's what a lot of these committees are, because we may have members come to us as a county board and ask for requests, and it's important that at least one of us is on that committee and understands it. Then the other one is alternate, which wasn't in your question. The alternate, we changed the rules about 3 years ago, where an alternate may attend a meeting of a primary commissioner 2 times a year and be reimbursed. But honestly, what we've always done is if the primary commissioner can't make it, we step in and fill it, and then we get a per diem for it. We often, if we attend a meeting as a second, we don't ask for the per diem. I feel that the commissioners have been very, very responsible in their collections of per diems and going to meetings.
What about the local ones? Like, you know, I was surprised to see the cemetery board. that-
We've looked at that a few times, and that board requires a commissioner participation.
But
Brady
how
looked
do
in.
they get to require it? You know, can I start a club and say, our board minutes say a commissioner should come? Somehow there seems that there should be more than the cemetery committee saying, we need a commissioner come to our meeting.
But the cemetery committee is not a cemetery committee that was just formed. The county owns some of this property, and state statute requires that we're responsible for
You
managing and
still
overseeing
own
it.
cemetery property? I didn't know that. I thought all the churches did.
So that's why we have a fiscal interest in all these things. We have a commissioner assigned to the community center board. The advisory board meets and they make resource recommendations, and they need to have a commissioner present so that when we're building the budget, all this stuff is taken into account. And the places like Arrowhead Regional Corrections and ARDC, again, I addressed that where there's
Those I
resources.
understand, yeah.
But the
We
other,
also save money. There have been commissions where I've been on, and I know that there's funding available through one organization, and I sit on both of those committees, so I'm able to say, there's funding available here. It's not levy dollars, it's not coming out of here, and then you bring those organizations together so that they can help each other out. So it also saves money.
Yeah.
and we have reduced that list in the 3 years that I've been here.
Yeah, I know there were 97 on that incomplete list. I have no idea how many the complete list covered.
And there's some of them that people seldom meet, even though it's a requirement, they're on there, they seldom meet.
Yeah, I used to be
I'll-
on a cemetery committee.
I'll go out on, it's not really out on a limb, but just my knowledge of how much we budget and for per diems in general, and it varies by commissioner. Some commissioners will go to more meetings than others, and it varies year to year. Maybe they get familiar and they don't go to as many the next year. But I will say that the whole group would average less than 2 of those per diem meetings a week.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. This is what I was talking about. So much more comfortable than reading
Yeah.
the questions and then wishing I had stayed home. I am so glad I came, thank you.
So your questions, if you had sent an email, you would get the same answer from each
Mhm.
commissioner. Those type of questions, you can, whichever commissioner you're comfortable with,
Mhm.
you can pick up the phone and call or send an email. And if we don't know, if you have a technical question, we will often hand it over to Jeff. And he'll get us the information or get you
Okay.
the information directly.
Okay, more to come.
So I will address the feedback that we go to the meetings, and is there feedback that comes back to the board? And yes, that's part of, toward the end of our meeting, we ask for concerns and meetings we've attended. So we give reports to whatever meeting that we think is interesting. We don't go on and on about
Right.
little things, but like ARDC, I represent ARDC. I started as a supervisor for Lutzen Township, and I've continued with that. And there's a lot there to report.
Yes.
So I give a report. This morning, we had Health and Human Services, and all of us are on a health board. And so at the end, I ask for reports from 5 or 6 different entities in our county for health, and we give the feedback to each other about that. So yes, there's a constant exchange of what's going on.
Thank you.
Are you able to see us live streamed?
Yes,
Okay. Okay. Anything else we want to look at? Yeah, for local committees to come to the county board as needed. Well, sometimes we try to have call-ins or Skype or something like that, but it has to work both ways.
Right, yeah.
Because we have an IT room that we can do it in.
oh.
It's just a matter of trying to get
I
other.
have a meeting in Canada tomorrow, and it's not about Canadians, it's a joint meeting, just before that gets out there. And I'm gonna have to call in, because I can't make the 2-hour drive. I've got other things I've gotta do.
Mhm. Is that as satisfactory as being there in person?
If you're comfortable with call-in meetings, if you're not comfortable with a call-in meeting, and if you're not familiar, if I was a brand-new commissioner and I'd never been to the meetings and I didn't know the faces, but I know all of the team players on this meeting, and so, and it was hard because I was just texting Jeff like an hour ago because I really would like to go to the meeting. I just don't have time. So I don't want to miss it either because this is a cross-border discussion that we have about the services we share with each other, and it is important to be at the table if I can't be physically sitting there. So I will call into it, and I was actually, when I was figuring out whether or not I collect per diem on it, I haven't even decided. And that's the other thing, I don't collect per diem for every meeting that I go to. I don't collect mileage either. If you look at the commissioner's budget, since I started, it's gone down every year.
And I also have extra meetings. I go to the township meetings. So tonight I'll be going to the Lutzen one, and I don't put any expense in on that.
Yeah.
And I don't collect for food, and, I mean, you know, we try to keep within
Yeah.
reason. We all go to two state important meetings, the Association of Minnesota Counties, and all 87 of us get together. And that's very rewarding because we can exchange ideas, we hear speakers, we talk about what's going on in our counties, and then we have smaller district meetings that lead up to that then. So I think we're very frugal with how we handle our travel and so forth. So, anything else on this from anybody? Okay, then I'll ask if there's anyone else who would have anybody else for public comment?
Stan?
I was just trying to get the wave started.
Oh, all right.
He just wants the camera over there.
I do have a question,
Donna.
Jim.
Okay.
I watch all the meetings, and this is the first one I've been able to attend, and I really appreciate the opportunity for
And could you
this.
state your name?
Donna Lunke.
Thank you, Donna.
In seeing, like, whether it's a committee of the whole meeting or whatever, there'll be, Jeff will say, I'll get that information and I'll get it to you. And then the next meeting comes and it's like, okay, we decided on that, you know, everybody, you vote on it, you ask for a, you know, for
Resolution.
a resolution, and you vote on it. And that middle piece of the information that you get, I'm not seeing that ever. And I wonder if that's important to anyone else. It always brings up questions in my mind when like Jeff, you'll say, I'll give you 3 scenarios. And then the scenarios are never discussed or rarely discussed, or sometimes are. And I would like to know about that middle piece. And how is that available?
Okay.
Madam Chair, could you be more specific, because that seems, like, give us an example of,
Are you talking about the materials?
Yeah.
The background material for the
Right,
agenda?
and I look for the meeting materials and I don't see it in there. Okay, I'm trying to think of an example. The board chair, how do we determine who's gonna be the board chair? And then you said, well, other, you know, counties handle it this way or whatever, I'll get that information and get it to you. And then the next meeting, you were elected. And
No,
it's
he
like,
addressed it at the next meeting.
he
He said, we looked into it. He addressed it before we
missed it
decided.
too.
Actually, at that meeting.
Was it?
It did talk about, that some other counties do have rotating chairs,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
instance. So I know I heard that being said at the meeting. I'm Mike Carlson, I do attend a lot of the.
So maybe that was a bad example, but
No,
there's,
no, no,
you
no,
know,
no.
I think you get what I'm
Yeah.
saying. There's, you know, pieces of information that
Mm-hmm.
are sent out, so I'm sorry if that was a bad example.
Okay, well, it was an easy one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just trying to pull something.
But you're right, there's some things that, you hear at the end of one meeting, and yes, it doesn't, because it's gone to the commissioners, but it hasn't been stated in
Yeah,
public.
so I guess that's, other than specifically doing an information request or a request for data, how do we find that out? You know, it's like that middle piece you're talking about, and I think this is a wonderful first step of being more transparent and getting information out to folks. So I guess my comment is that's one piece of the puzzle that I'm curious about.
Well, there wouldn't be any data related to that. Because I called some of my peers, each of the commissioners talked to people they know in other counties. We exchanged an email that I told them I would provide them with a couple of different options for how they would select their leadership from amongst themselves. And in truth and in honesty, it's up to those 5 people who have been selected as the commissioners to determine the leadership from amongst themselves. That's not I mean, it happens in the public, it's reported in the public, but that's not a public that's open to public process. That's a process that's chosen from amongst the 5 leaders. So the information that I shared with them was, I could not find a system where there was a rotation that would work without exception, given the fact that we've got 3 seats that are up for election this year, and a commissioner that's not interested in serving as chair. And then if we plan for the possibilities of skips, I said I couldn't put together a system that was complicated enough to be simple enough to use. And in the same time, they all individually talked to their peers and said, the best thing we can do is find out who's interested, and then by motion, appoint somebody to be chair, which is the process we'd always been using. So a lot of that happens all of the time. You know, when we're talking about the budget, and we're talking about millions of dollars, we did present multiple scenarios, and we talked about multiple scenarios, and we presented background information. And we had an exhaustive public process, because that's that. The process for choosing the commissioners is at the election time, and then they're responsible for choosing their leadership from amongst themselves.
No, I get that, and I think.
So I know they're 2 different
example.
scenarios.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, really, literally, Sherry and Donna, you have questions about those things? Send me an email or call me. If there was a disconnect, if there was a miss, if there was something that should have been provided, I'll be happy to fix the correction. If I can just answer the question in a phone call, I'm happy to do that. I talk to people all the time. And I know that that people are saying, Sherry and I exchanged a lot of emails. And we couldn't come up to a good resolution because we're stuck between different types of processes. But we all just live here, and this is a small community, we know each other, we can talk to each other. And we have to have that level of trust and respect both ways across that to get over I didn't get what I wanted. But sometimes you just have to ask specifically for what it is. I missed that piece, could you tell me how that happened? And at the end, we don't always have to agree, but we always have to understand that we all had a fair opportunity to have a conversation. Does that make a little more sense?
No, thank you.
You have a question, you know how to get a hold of me.
Yes.
It's like when we get, the packets go online on Thursday and I go through it and I call Jeff or I call the department head to get answers. There's no documentation of that. I've done my homework before I got to the meeting on Tuesday. And I know that there's been comments, the commissioners don't ask questions anymore. Well, we do our homework before we get to the meeting, so we come prepared to make a decision. And none of that there's no track of that. So, I mean, when I first started, I used to be frustrated that commissioners who came in and didn't seem to have their homework done before we started a meeting and toss out questions, and I felt bad for the people that had to answer the questions, because I'm like, why didn't you at least tell them you were gonna ask the question before they got here, so they had the answer? And so I think that now that we have administrative government and we don't have to track down department heads anymore, we have all of our information. Even if it's not in the packet, we've got all of our questions answered before we get there on Tuesday. So, I mean, and it's the same thing when he says, I'll get back to you. It's just that back homework that we do.
Well, that's a good point, Donna. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's a gap that we'll see that we can be a little more open about it when we come to the meeting, because there is a process that needs to be done. So, thank you for that. Anyone else? Anything else? Any other public comment? Okay, well, thank you, and you're welcome to stay. We're going to go on and discuss some other things. We'll turn it over to Jeff to start working on our agenda for that.
And Madam Chair, I would ask, we had a quick conversation before we started. We have item A talking about our bonding list, and item B talking about a request from Firewise for a consideration of a policy change. And I suggested that we address item B first, just so Todd doesn't have to stay, but if everybody else would rather that we talk about the bonding list and we inconvenience Todd for a few minutes, I'm sure he'd be fine with that too. So does anybody have a strong opinion where we start?
Let's do it.
Like,
I still don't know.
I
We're gonna
say
do Todd
Todd
first.
I know, I was on the same kind of Tom.
So then, this is a pretty easy conversation. By way of brief introduction, at the Public Safety and Transportation meeting back in October or November, Todd brought a request or an idea or a conversation about a policy that we could use to help, some ordinance language, proposed ordinance language to help with the Firewise goals. So that's all the introduction I'm gonna give here. Go ahead and explain what you're looking for.
Sure, yeah, thank you, appreciate you giving me a few minutes here. Yeah, so Firewise has certain, recommendations for, one of the big ones is access to properties. It would be roadways and driveways. Access for emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, or large vehicles. I don't think people always realize how much room they need. And one of the ways we've addressed that is we've sent out postcards to folks reminding them what driveway, your vegetation needs to be on your driveway to get safe access to your structure. But another one is roads that it's come up a few times in 2017, some specific cases where we had Firewise grants to help with roadside brushing and height clearance requirements. And there was one property owner that was opposed to that on the road in 3 different situations, so we didn't go forward with it. And some property owners are asking, what can we do? How can we, how can I help them more? I can have conversations with the people who don't, agree with the vegetation standards, but they're wondering if there's more that could be done at the county level. And talking with the volunteer fire departments, it's a big concern for them as well. For example, we updated our community wildfire protection plan just last year, and the comments that we got from the fire departments, I think in all cases, their top concern was access, ingress, egress. We're talking firefighter safety here, but we're also property owner safety if there's a situation where there needs to be an evacuation on short notice. So it comes up often and more, I think, as we raise awareness about it too through Firewise. People are becoming more aware of it and have more concerns. The Firewise committee, wanted to see an ordinance in the county, county-wide or in the subdivision standards, but from what I understand, that's just not feasible right now for a number of reasons. It was suggested that the subordinate service district might be another way that we could provide the property owners as kind of a way. If they formed a subordinate service district, that would be one of the requirements, that you keep 14 feet of vegetation clearance, for example. So that way, if they wanted to form a subordinate service district, that was already in the language. So that's kind of the request that I have is it possible to amend the subordinate service district language to include something for that, you have like a 14-foot height clearance and if possible, a 20-foot width clearance, just following all the international and state fire codes.
So it's only on new subordinate service district contracts.
So there's always there's always two challenges. We, as local government, don't want to regulate private property any more than we have to. But public safety is one of the reasons why we legitimately have a reason to be concerned and weigh a policy or an ordinance. One of the primary challenges we have to establishing an ordinance and standards is, do we have the ability, do we have the staff to make people comply? And do we have the standing to make people comply? So a conversation of public safety and transportation was, Land Services is simply saying, we don't have the capacity to make a countywide standard for roadside vegetation clearance. And even if we do, we could only apply it probably to county roads. And then what happens with all the miles of not county roads in this county? We have lots of reasons why this is a big problem to get a grasp on. And so I think we came around to the point of Todd suggesting that we identify this standard for supplemental service, subordinate service districts going forward, so that we at least have a toe in the door and we have a way to test and implement this. Right now, we only have six existing service districts. So it's, and kind of a part of the process with this committee of the whole is where we actually have all 5 commissioners. And we're responding to stuff that was developed at the Public Safety and Transportation Committee that has 2 commissioners. At the Personnel Committee, which has 2 commissioners. At the Budget and General Government Committee that has 2 commissioners. The reason for having 2 commissioners in a committee is a quorum of the body requires a notice in a public meeting. And having 2 means we're having a conversation about policy options, and we're working with the staff and we're working with the public to take their requests and review whether that makes sense in light of budget constraints, in light of legal restraints, in all of those. So by the time they get here, what we're saying is we talked about this and we came to a point in discussing the policy that we're not sure what the whole body is thinking. Or we're just coming here and we're saying we've got something that we think makes a whole lot of sense and we really need the whole board to take a look at it and say, yeah, we think we're ready to take action on that, and then we put it on a commissioner's agenda in the future. So there's 2 reasons something gets here. 1, we're looking at the policy, we're not sure what we should do with it. Or 2, we're pretty sure what we should do with it, and we just want to review that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's, and we're ready to bring it to a board meeting for consideration of the board. So this is one of the former, where we're looking at a policy that's just bigger than we have capacity for, but we also know there's a bona fide public safety component to it. And Todd's been very persistent in saying, I want to come and talk to the whole group, so.
Todd's been very persistent because he has this commissioner who backs him. And this commissioner who would like it to be a countywide policy, but we also have a septic inspection plan that has been put on hold because we don't have the capacity of staff to follow through. So I get the restrictions, but as someone who serves on the fire department and having 10 homes on the other side of a property owner who refuses to have it open for fire trucks to get through, any way that we can help assist the Firewise communities get this done is important to me. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Just a little question. The subordinate, normally a subordinate group, the county collects taxes, then puts out for bid either the grading or the snow plowing.
Okay.
I don't know how we collect taxes and then what, hire a grubber to
We
go
wouldn't.
in? I mean, I'm
We
not.
wouldn't.
So how do you actually put that into a subordinate group? I mean, the only thing we've ever done is snow plowing and gravel.
So the requirement would be that for that subordinate district to exist, they need to be willing to work with Firewise. So that came up 3 times this year where you had funds and you had the ability and you had a private owner that said, you can't do this on my property. Whereas if they were part of one of those subordinate districts and we had that, we wouldn't be going to them for the funding of it. We'd just be going to them as the people that are saying, we're providing a public safety portion along with providing this maintenance.
But now, if you're on a federal, like I'm on a stretch of federal, 8/10 of a mile of federal land, the federal government, in order to continue to give you opportunity to run on that road, wants you to have a road association. I think technically, if you're gonna subdivide, if you're gonna do any of that stuff, that has to be written in. I know that the covenants is a bad word up here, and I've always personally hated it from a planning and zoning aspect. But technically, that falls to the group of landowners. It really does, because that same person who doesn't want you to now cut, it sure isn't gonna line up for your subordinate group. And I mean, they'll lobby just as hard not to have it because they don't want to pay extra taxes based on things they think they should either get or don't get. It's a, because I'm on one of those roads. They came in and Firewise my house, told me everything I need to do to my house, but realistically, my road is nowhere in compliance. So what's the incentive to do my house if my road's not compliant? I mean, you know, and realistically, by the time what they wrote down for me to be compliant, I'd be cutting 30 feet into my neighbor's yard. Some of this older stuff is just gonna be tough. You either have to prove it to the landowners and make them want it, but to try to, this is just my opinion, the subordinate group is gonna be met with just as much resistance as a covenant or a road association. We're an independent bunch of people, why?
So the, you know, I think part of it is, you know, we're asking volunteer firefighters to respond to things, and, you know, they're putting their lives on the line. They're gonna respond. So I think it's our responsibility to, you know, make that safely accessible for them, not just to get in, but to get out
In a
if
perfect
things go
world,
wrong.
I'd agree with you.
So,
And it's a better understanding when we start a new subordinate service and you might have a group of homeowners that want plowing done, but they can't do it on their own or agree on the contract or whatever, and so they have the assistance with the county. And if their contract to become a subordinate service district is at the beginning upfront and says, with this, you also need to meet Firewise standards in the right-of-way on the road, they know going in where they need to be.
Who knows where they need to be?
The-
Any
the-
future districts?
any-
Oh, any future districts?
Yes.
But that's not really what we're dealing with. We're
Yeah.
dealing with my crappy
Yeah.
little neighborhood and little
No,
crappy
we're talking
neighborhoods
about-
around Pike
no.
Lake and
No, we're
I'm
talking
just
about.
talking going forward with subordinate service.
newer
district.
development.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
We're
And I-
looking
is
at,
there
we're
100
looking at building it into things as they progress. So a new proposed service district would be for the maintenance that they're asking for, but we would also say then that we're gonna try to enforce these guidelines as we go forward as well too.
Hmm.
And
Not
then-
necessarily be able to, we can't tell them we're gonna tax them for that, we're not gonna collect for that, but we've had instances this past year where we had the resources to take care of that, we just didn't have the permission to do it.
Yeah, we've turned back grant funds, I mean, in this case.
Oh, yeah, my neighborhood
so-
did it.
but-
They could have got good money to get their road fixed, but
yeah.
stubborn bunch.
I used to work for the DNR Forestry and did a lot of work on Firewise roads. And it was so frustrating that the lack of maintenance after it was, the roadsides were cleared. 5 years later, you could hardly drive through them because the brush and trees had already encroached that much. And, you know, it was just, I just felt it was a lot of pouring good money after bad, without a plan there. And I don't know how you would enforce this and keep these up on some of these real remote areas. One that I'm thinking of is north of Holden there, the Camp 20 road. And that road is just,
It's not
I mean, it's a 5 mile an hour road now.
Is that a subordinate service district road?
So trees are getting so close.
Trees are getting in, the road is just about impassable, culverts are washed out, you know, and the people that live there don't own the road, nor have property along that road. And we did have fires in that area. And when the fires came in, we improved the road, but if somebody had to get out of there, they were out of luck. There was no way to get out of there easily.
There isn't gonna be an easy solution for this. It's
No.
just,
No.
do we find a place to start and do we agree on a place where we can start and work forward? I mean, up until this point, without actually changing any of our rules or requirements, then we're doing, Firewise and AIS, we're doing the same way. We're just asking people to comply. And we're trying to provide enough information so that people can make good decisions. And to that point, that might be all the resources that we ever have. But if we have an opportunity, if we plan development and there's a better practice that we can build into it, that's kind of the request here, is that we build a better practice into those requirements going forward. It's not gonna, we're not gonna have the resources to go backwards. Around here, people see it. The rest of the world, when you're driving as fast as you drive, you don't see how nature will encroach on our infrastructure until you walk. And people walk around here, so they see it. But it is amazing how quickly stuff grows back.
It does.
And just maintaining our 300 miles of county roads is hard enough, let alone the other 2,000, 2,500, who knows how many miles of roads and trails that there are that people are using. And the challenge is, as people are moving and developing and living in those places, you create the opportunity where you might have a significant risk for public safety problem that's going to affect other people and providers. I was a licensed EMT too, and I've been in some bad places you don't want to be with a big truck that isn't very nimble.
Have you identified any areas right now?
Well, I mean.
Go ahead and pick on it.
No, yeah, most
Okay.
of them are in your district. I mean, I haven't brought this up to folks, but they've asked me what they could do to move forward, or is there anything? So I thought this could be a system that they could use to move forward. But I haven't specifically told them about it.
Yeah,
But,
and doing this isn't gonna help him go to the problem areas and do anything different. This is just gonna help us moving forward with future districts.
And,
Yeah, so let's say that someone organizes this sub-district and they make an application and we had this requirement, and so it is assumed that the people that form this service district, subordinate service district, would need to get commitments from all the property owners to have accessible property to a certain standard. Is that what you're saying?
well, it would be just the road portion, the shared road. It wouldn't be their
It wouldn't be their
driveways or anything. It'd just be the shared road. I guess
And
what
the shared road is
property?
what's being maintained.
Yeah, it'd
Well,
be,
I think
guess
that's a no-brainer.
their property would abut that shared road in those cases.
Okay, so.
So that
It is
part,
just the service road.
yeah.
I
yeah.
thought you were talking about access to properties.
I mean,
You're talking
that
about.
that would be great in a
Okay.
perfect world.
I'm
but
sorry, I
No, I'm just
misunderstood.
talking about the shared road
Well, I-
itself,
yeah,
not
I would
individual.
say if they're gonna use federal funds or Firewatch funds, then they're required, I mean, I would think they have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we can't guarantee that we'll have the funds always to do it. I mean, we have in the past, but we can't guarantee that we can use Firewise funds to help them. I mean, we hope we can, but we
So
don't
there's-
always get the same amount of grant funding. And it's,
So would we be asking that they permit those standards, or that they be required to maintain those standards if they apply it to be an SGSD?
I'd say
I
required
would
to
say to
maintain.
maintain, that's what I was.
That's what you were hoping for, was to get towards, the
To-
requirement is that
Yeah.
in maintaining a road that qualifies for that they would maintain those standards.
Yeah.
But if the county's gonna gravel and plow,
Well, in those service districts, the county doesn't gravel and plow. The property owners gravel and plow. All we do is we create the service district and we coordinate.
collect the money.
And we
Okay.
collect the money and we coordinate a bidding and a contracting, and other providers provide the
Couldn't
service,
they
so.
do that in their contract, saying that they're gonna maintain a certain standard?
That's what we're asking.
That's what he's asking us to do,
That's what we're
is to
asking.
include that standard in any of those agreements going forward. We talked about a very similar issue last year when we were talking about the driveway permitting. And we have a bona fide reason to, when we permit an entrance to a county road, we can specify the length of the driveway, the slope of the driveway, all those things to, within reasons. And we need to get back to that, but we need to specify our access driveway permitting ordinance and update that. This is just, this has This happens to happen off of our county roads. On our county roads, we've already got that. This is where it's happening off of our county roads. And we're just primarily trying to protect the public safety workers. And two, to further the goals of Firewise and to mitigate risk to everybody else that owns property out here.
So if people apply for this in the process of, we collect the money and they contract it out, we don't currently have any standards that have to be met in order to
For
get
Firewise.
that contract. So, okay,
No,
so
but
this
the-
would be the first step in requirements.
The people who might be making those requests, the people who might be thinking about bidding on providing services on that road, are gonna take a look at that road and see if they feel they're safe to operate their equipment going up and down it. And that may limit whether somebody is willing to provide services on that road.
Okay.
But it doesn't necessarily meet the standards that Todd's talking about.
I understand better, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I have a question. We lived in California on property that had been big ranch property. So, you had your own little 40 acres after they broke it down. And we lived on an access road that the county did not have anything to do with. So we formed a volunteer road association, and it worked out pretty well. But if we had not done that and the road hadn't been kept up, we'd have no reason to think we had the right to have people come in and protect us when we have fires and whatever, would we? I mean, if the county didn't own the road and basically it was just there and we used it, well, how does that work then with the requirement that fire services, police services, and whatever provide to you?
That's one of the biggest challenges we face here, because we have so much federal and state land, and we have such limited access. But the fact of the matter is a major forest fire could start someplace in an unserviced area and still affect people that are paying property taxes and have county resources.
Yeah.
So the best practices of Firewise, in this case, are good practices all the way through, because they help to mitigate and minimize that risk. In addition to protecting your own property, you may be helping. It's like getting the flu shot. Maybe you don't need it, but maybe it protects the person next to you.
Right. But do people who choose to live, as we did, out in the rural areas, now where was I going with that?
Do they expect to get services?
Yeah, why?
I get more phone calls from people who live on Forest Service roads that want me as the county commissioner to call the Forest Service and tell them to fix it. I get more calls for that than I do for anything else.
But then there ought to be a way of saying to them, I'm sorry,
They
that
know
isn't
when
how
they
it
buy
is."
the property.
Yeah.
It's just, we are a very accommodating community and we help each other out, and so.
Yeah.
No, 30 or 40 years ago, the expectations were different. When I was a kid growing up, you knew you were getting close to where you were going because the branches were touching the truck on all four sides, right? That was our expectation. The road to the cabin that I grew up going to right now looks like, which one does it look like around here? Well, it looks like County Road 8, Ball Club, right? The parts that have been improved and widened, that's how that road looks now. And what happens is, instead of people having to be real careful, people are driving 60 miles an hour now.
Yeah.
It's the same here as it was there, and better cars, faster cars, better handling, better roads, all those things just continue. And then I've taken phone calls from people who have bought property knowing that they don't have access to their property. They know that, but they don't know that. And they still call and they say, when is somebody gonna come out and maintain our road? And I look it up and I say, I'm sorry, you're 5 miles beyond any place that the county maintains. And they say, well, it was maintained when I bought it. And I said, well, then there was a logging, there was a commercial interest. That road was improved and maintained at a point in time when there was a reason to do that. And now the only time someone's gonna do that is if there's another commercial interest, or property owners do it, take it amongst themselves. And there are people who are not very well-informed buyers buying stuff in Cook County now, and they have expectation that they would get someplace else. I was very surprised moving here when I was shopping for real estate that I had to be very careful about specifying indoor plumbing. Because everywhere else, it's a given in the state of Minnesota, and it's not necessarily a given. So there's a lot of clash. The public-private is a challenge, and that's one of the biggest policy challenges that we face.
That's a conversation we had yesterday, because we have the highest population in the summer, so they come here when it's dry and beautiful out, and they drive up this 90-degree hill to get out of the driveway, and then they come up here in the winter and go, well, how am I gonna get out of my driveway? And it's like,
So generally, to keep moving, I think we go back to the public safety and transportation, Todd, and just say, yeah, let's take a look at what that would look like and come up with some language, and we'd have to go through Molly's office to make sure that she thinks it's something we can do and bring it back. But I don't think anybody's opposed to looking at the possibility of adding this to, from what I'm hearing, and I'm saying this out loud as in a question format, but the commissioners are supportive of us developing what some language would look like to require this on new SGSDs going forward and bring it back for them to look at again. It's right now, we're just vaguely talking about policy, and we would probably have to actually propose something, put it in writing, work with the committee, and then bring it back here for that.
One tricky stumbling block you got too is always on the dead end road. Somebody's gotta lose. Somebody's gotta give up property for the hammerhead turnaround and stuff. And that tends to be real problematic if you're the guy on the end of the road. You don't want people, I mean, technically now all of a sudden people say they want you to have this hammerhead or turnaround, and technically that's where the road ends at your property. And there's some real cell issues that are tricky. And the fact is you just can't put a sign up and say, if your property starts on fire, your road is crap and we're not gonna bring trucks back, because we live in a tourist destination where one fire, any fire, has impact on us all. And we have such a narrow strip of land that once that land gets caught on fire, it's gonna be hard to get out. So I don't honestly know, but I know that was one of the big killers on my road, was the guy at the end of the road didn't want to give up the turnaround, and then other people don't want the road widened, and what I found is trees are growing on trees. You cut them down, they grow right back, but people just, I don't know, it's kind of weird, especially getting a maple forest or something. They don't want any trees cut down. You, my friend, have got a hard road to hoe.
I kind of wish everyone had scanners so they could listen to the chain of calls when someone's trying to get to a property with an ambulance, and you've got 4 firefighters going, well, you can't come in this driveway, but if we go in the neighbor's driveway, there's a path through the trees and you can carry them through the woods, and this is all going on the radio.
No, I agree.
Well, thank you, Todd, for coming in.
Thank you.
Super highway compared to Howard Lake.
The next topic, and there were some copies of the agenda in this packet that had the bonding list. I had some additional copies. If you want a copy, they'll be on the website before the end of the week, but if you want a paper copy, I can make one.
I don't know how to enlarge the stuff that goes on.
On the website?
Yeah,
We
or
can-
is it on the conversation? I get these little papers and I got my magnifying glass and I don't know how to make it larger.
On your computer?
Uh-huh.
Oh, on your computer, you ought to be able to change the zoom on.
Oh, the Zoom.
Yeah,
Oh,
you go
I
into
heard
view
about
it
that.
and just
Yeah.
zoom in and out on the page. Yeah.
Okay,
You
all
can-
right, I
you can
forgot I
change-
knew that.
Yep.
There I
So
go
you-
with my magnifying glass.
Yeah, sometime over the Christmas holiday, I crossed over where I really should wear my readers more often. So I understand what you're saying. Right now, my arms are still
Yeah.
long enough.
You need somebody to hold it a little further away.
It's very fun to watch his wife direct the country.
She's just a little bit older than me. So anyway, the first page is the list of the numbers and the projects and all of that. The second page is probably the more important thing that we understand now is, we had been talking about going forward with a general obligation capital improvement plan bonds and some equipment bonds. And per the schedule that we talked with Ellers about, we were gonna have this conversation at the committee of the whole in February. And we're having it in January now, partially because I didn't read this and I thought, let's bring it because we're ready. We had this conversation at the committee of the whole back in October with almost identical, the same list. A couple of things have changed, and I'll tell you why that's happened. But there's a couple of dates that are important, is the capital improvement plan public hearing notice presented to the county for the board for approval, which simply says that the board is going to authorize a notice to go into the newspaper to say we're gonna have a public hearing to talk about the issuance of public debt. And that we have a deadline to get that notice in the newspaper. That notice has to run a minimum of 14 days and a maximum of 28 days before that hearing. So the March 13, 16, April 1st, April 2nd, and April 10th are linked together simply because they specify an amount of time to go through the process of issuing public debt and providing proper public notice and hold the required public hearing. So those pieces in there, they can be adjusted, but they move together. The pieces after that are really, that's just the issuance of the debt. That's the process of saying, we've got a list, we've reviewed these priorities, we want to fund these things, we want to get these things done, and this is the process for issuing debt so that we can pay for those things. But the preliminary work is in reviewing the list and reviewing the sources and uses of funds and reviewing the priorities to make sure these are all correct. So go back to the list. Any questions about the schedule? You've all seen similar schedules. I think you saw this schedule back in October when we were looking at Plan A and Plan B. We looked at a previous schedule back in August when we were talking about possibly doing this in late 2017. And then the question came up, when do you actually need the funds? And we said construction is going to be in 2018. And our financial consultants and our bond attorney said, why would you issue the debt before you need the money? So that's why it all got pushed back. And it was probably better because having this conversation at the same time we were having the budget conversation would have just been confusing. So back to the bonding list, the transportation sales tax, we turned the transportation sales tax on so that we would be able to take on some projects that we weren't able to take on because we didn't have a source of funding for them. Transportation sales tax is on track to meet our expectations of bringing in about $750,000 a year. It'll be a little less in 2017 when we look at it because it started January 1, 2017. There's a little bit of a lag in the collections. But we're likely on track for collections of $750,000 a year, which is important because those are the commitment of funds that we have to pay the bill for the projects that we're proposing and some future projects that we'll be proposing against that source of revenue. The CASA 42 and 45 engineering, we entered into that agreement and started doing that last spring. That is ongoing. We're paying some of those bills out of current funds and we'll be replacing them with this proposal. CASA 17, construction. This is probably the best time to make that conversation too. The transportation sales tax had a listing of projects that were authorized for use with the transportation funding. It also had a dollar amount that had listed. And the preliminary proposed construction amount for the County 17 project was about $2.7 million. We changed some significant assumptions when we went into the design phase for the County 17 project. Primarily, we're looking at 3 miles of paving instead of 1 mile of paving. And then we found that we needed a lot more fill material for the other 8 miles, the old 61 road, than we thought we were going to. So the cost to do this changed from our engineering budget estimates to our engineered engineer's estimate of cost, which is the next page on the list. So at some point, while we have the public hearing to issue the public debt, we're also probably gonna have to have a public hearing to modify the transportation sales tax project list for two reasons. One, because some of the project scope has changed and the numbers have changed. And two, because some of our priorities changed. Over the last month and a half, we got some deficient notices from the state bridge inspector about the Brule Run Bridge on Ski Hill Road and Carlson Creek Bridge on County Road 71, saying essentially they're gonna shut those bridges down unless we attend to them immediately. So we don't really have an opportunity but to move those ahead on the priority schedule and move a couple of other things down the list on the priority schedule. So that's why this list looks a little bit different. We talked about doing Cardinal Road, County Road 101. And from an engineering standpoint, our technicians have not determined what the best way to treat that road is because there's a lot of ledge rock just below the gravel. And looking at the priority, these two bridges have to be prioritized above a road that is sufficient the way it is. It's not gonna be about to lose service. So that's why the transportation sales tax project list looks a little bit different and why the numbers have changed. And it just talks to the fact that we have an additional public hearing that we can hold the same day we hold the public hearing related to the issuance of debt. The transportation sales tax required us to submit a project list. The transportation sales tax also allows us to amend that project list at any given time while it's inauthorized, as long as there's a public hearing and the board supports a resolution to amend the project list. So all of these things were on that project list. All of the bridges were on that project list. Some of them weren't in the 5-year horizon, but they need to be. And bridge bonding revenues are not going to be available for these things. The next bridge bonding opportunity is 2020 for funding in 2021. And I just don't think we can say to everybody on County 71 past that culvert that you're just going to park here and wait until 2021 or 2022 when we can get to it. And it's potentially an exaggeration. We could do some things to modify that structure. But some of their modifications, their reinforcements would cost half as much as the actual repair that's gonna last 25 years. And I just can't see putting a Band-Aid, $100,000 Band-Aid on something that you can fix for $300,000, especially since we now have this source of funding to reprioritize that project. So that's how that list has evolved to this point. I'd take questions about the list of the project related to the transportation sales tax. Brady, is that
Yeah,
fair and accurate?
I would just say the reason we have to have the other public hearing is because there is no bonding discussed in the transportation sales tax law, so we have to tie that to the CIP bond. So we want to say that this plan, the transportation sales tax plan, is part of our CIP. They're one and the same. So we want to have the public hearing so that transportation list is exactly what we're going to put in that plan.
That makes sense.
What did we end up collecting last year for transportation? For the sales tax?
I didn't look recently, but we were on track month by month. We didn't collect for, as Jeff said, we didn't collect for all 12 months. We didn't actually start till March. So it's less than 750, but it'll be at least 750 this year. I'll get you that for the next meeting, because we should look and just see what we've actually collected. Yeah, we'll have at least the full 750 if things stay the way they are, probably a little more.
One of the easiest ways to look at that is we're collecting it on the same sales that the 1% sales tax, and the 1% exceeded 1.5 million this past year again.
So half of that is a little more than 750, so as soon as we're collected 12 months, we'll make that.
Joe, where's Cross River?
Where's Cross River?
Tell me where it is in the town.
It's on North Gunflint Road, County Road 46.
But it's been put off.
It's been put off, and I think that we're, in this case, with that one, we're actually probably gonna have to put the expensive bandage on it because we're not gonna be able to fix it in the same time frame, which will mean that we have a little bit wider window to actually do the bridge replacement.
So it's not gonna be done in 2020?
I'm not saying it won't be done in 2020,
Okay.
but,
Because that's the next round of bonding.
so you guys will get some more information as soon as we get an engineer on staff. But the Cross River Bridge is the only bridge that made the deficient list. The other three that made the deficient list are technically bridges, but they're all culverts. And so the way to fix a culvert underneath a gravel road is to lay some timbers across the top and throw more gravel over the top of it, and you say, okay, well, that's good. And that's one of the suggestions. But there's no engineering required to fix the culvert on Moose Valley Road, so that's why we, as a group, as engineering techs and an engineer to be named later, when we were talking about these, said that makes sense to do that one now rather than spend money and then do it again. The Cross River Bridge, the way to fix it is to put some big timbers across the top and some steel beams underneath and bolt them together so that they meet the load rating, so that they will stay in place until we can fix it. And that's probably the repair that we're gonna have to put in place to make sure that we have the load rating and those properties are serviceable until we can actually repair the bridge.
And legislative bonding is only on the even year, so 2018 is bonding, and we don't get another one until 2020. So that's why we want to deal with it now.
And I have a very large business that needs to know.
They will have a rated bridge. We can't not.
They're not worried about the rated bridge. When we were talking construction, it meant shutting down of access and transferring access. And they need to know that for their guests.
Yeah, I've seen the plans, and the plans, have you ever been out on Red Lake when the ice moves and they bring in the civil engineers bridges, and they're looking at bypass. There will be a plan to continue
Right.
access to those places, but.
I never introduced myself. I'm Sue Dittus, but I'm also old. And so what I would like to request is that people speak a little louder if they could. Some of us are losing our hearing and have put off getting hearing aids.
Come sit down here by us.
So any other questions about the transportation projects? I mean, we've discussed this list at our Highway Advisory Committee. We've taken a look at it. We're working it with our engineering staff. It's the most, if we're looking at possibly 8.4 million and 6.3 is transportation projects that funded with non-levy dollars. Okay, we need to understand that this portion would be funded with those transportation sales tax funds. If you look at our financial management plan that we had done last year, there's two things that we need to do going into this year after we get this resolved, is plug in the actual budget for 2018, and then plug in these actual numbers for this issuance of debt, and then recalculate our capacity for those additional capital projects, because we showed another transportation sales tax related bond issuance as a placeholder to identify the County Road 45 project 2 or 3 years down the road. We also showed a placeholder to invest in the law enforcement center a few years down the road, and to address the highway facilities a few years down the road beyond that. So we have to update the plan that we put in place. I would suggest at some point this spring that the board adopt that plan, and then we take a look at what our assumptions are, because we need to manage those assumptions to know, as we're working the jail facility review, and they're coming up with recommendations on what they think we should be doing later this year, those recommendations have to fit within a financial parameter that the board sets as well. And updating and then approving that plan going forward gives some direction as to what are the bounds for each of these potential projects going forward. Providing the planning documents doesn't authorize the spending the money, it doesn't authorize the building of those things. It just says, okay, for instance, if we needed $3 million on the law enforcement center to do this, and this was the financial impact of that, then we look at the plan and we say, do we have the capacity? Or what do we have to adjust to have the capacity? So all these pieces will work together. But the 2018 actuals and whatever we do with this bond issuance will have to go in before we can recalculate our capacities for those other projects. The capital project list, courthouse roof and windows, the law enforcement center windows. I don't think anybody had any questions about those projects as being necessary. That's a maintenance item that we've been carrying since before I got here. And we've got the estimates in here. We're confident in these numbers. So the next item on the list is related to the community center. Thank you, Diane, for being patient. And I've participated in the last 2 community center advisory boards. We've had to go back and forth on our scale of what this project looks like based on what's allowed in this type of bonding. And we're having to be a little bit creative, but not overly creative, because at some point we'd already have to make a designation of part of that facility as a park anyway. So do you want to talk about the numbers that get us to that 400,000?
I certainly can do that. I came to the county board at the end of November, I believe, November 28th, and I asked for $205,713 that would address the playground. The playground facility is, normally playground lifespan is 12 to 15 years old. Playground that we have there now is going on 24 years old. And we've had some pieces fall off of it. And I think this is my 3rd year of coming to the county board and saying, okay, we have to do something or we have to take it out, one of the two.
So just briefly, this summary page that Diane is talking from is in this packet, and it's just behind. Sequentially, everything follows through from the front listing. So right behind the windows and the rough estimates, there's this 1-page summary of the community center.
And so, as you know, when you're working on capital projects and you're working with community processes, you can work for 8 months to a year and think that you've got everybody in the loop and everybody's agreeing to things, and then, 2 weeks later, a group comes out of the woodwork that you hadn't anticipated, and we have a new Cook County Amateur Hockey Association group of young parents coming out. They're about 3 weeks old right now. And they have attended the last 2 meetings that we've had, and they really would not, originally we had talked about, well, we're not going to have any hockey here, right? So let's shorten and make the rink smaller so that we have a little more space there, and it wouldn't cost us as much money to fix, and then we could have room for a smaller warming house. They have come to the board and they really would like to make sure we keep the rink the same size so that if they would in the future have tournaments of some kind, or if they have more kids that come out, instead of, right now the rink is 200 feet long by 85 feet wide. Standard is like 185 by 85, but the 200 allows them to do a few more things. And we actually met again yesterday. And so if we would go forward and put in the new concrete curbs, take out the old concrete, redo that, and then put in a warming house and a Zamboni garage, our request goes from $205,713 to $400,013. And that's assuming we don't get any grant money. Now, I am writing grants like crazy. And we will see whether any of those come to fruition, so that number might be backed up. So I realize this is a real late request to go from the $205 to the $413, but as many of you know, that warming house and that rink has been on the schedule for quite some time. And we are getting a lot more outside visitors. I get a lot of calls, when is your skating going to open? We're doing a lot more skate rentals. In order to do it right, and I've been through a number of county processes where we've done it wrong. In order to do it right, we probably really do need a much larger building in order to put the skate sharpener in there, to have a place to rent skates, a place for the Zamboni to be. We have one, which we're very fortunate.
So
and a
does this
place-
plan include the larger facility?
Yes.
That's why the dollars are
Yes,
more than they
that's
were.
why the
And
dollars have
And did
gotten-
we take away all your warming house money in our shenanigans?
No.
Okay.
If you look at the beginning where it says the amounts are as follows, that's first amount that says 60,000 is still from the 1%.
Okay.
The Cook County Hockey Association was going to give us 42,000. They have reduced that by 10,000 to 32,000 as of yesterday, for sure. And the 132,700 that's in here is from the lawsuit for, that's what's left after paying the bills. So we have $234,700. We did not anticipate, I had said, do we need to do concrete curbs? You know, I had talked to Lon Hoagland out of Duluth who said, well, you could just dig down, right, and put our ice there. Well, our new hockey association really wants to have the concrete curbs and do it that way. Who am I to, I don't play hockey. I have lots of nephews that play hockey, but I don't play hockey. But if they're kind of recommending this, I really feel like we should kind of go with their recommendations. And at our last board meeting, which Jan, you were at, that was the recommendation of the Community Center Board of Trustees. So I have told the Hockey Association and the Community Center Board of Trustees, we're coming into this late. You may say, you know what, we can't do this. We need to wait and do this second piece, you know, in 2020 or whenever we do another bond. So I'm just here to say, this is what's happened, this is where we're at, and to listen to what you have to say.
What's the additional cost to have curbs?
Well, 185,000, if you look, we've got, part of that is, it's 185,000 if we take all the concrete out, we pulverize it, and we use it for right on site. Now, we would only go with that if we get the $76,300 that I've applied to for IRRB to mitigate those costs. IRRB says the only way they will consider our grant is if we use the material on site. If that doesn't happen, it goes down to about 165,000, like 20,000 less. So obviously, if we wouldn't get that grant, we would go back to the 165. We would not use the material on site. It's kind of nice to be able to use it on site. You feel kind of better about it, but you know, we also have to look at the dollars.
Okay.
The curb is one of the biggest challenge with the ice is not even necessarily that the face of the concrete is bad. The biggest challenge with the ice is that the face of the concrete is bad, which means we don't believe the durability is there, it's not going to last, so it needs to be replaced. But the biggest challenge with the ice, the way that it is we just can't get enough water, we can't get a thick enough sheet of ice for it to be durable. So later this week when it rains, it's going to take a big pounding. And if we had this much ice, right, then you have 2 days where you say everybody stay off the ice. When it freezes solid again, we're going to run the Zamboni and then we're going to be able to skate. We're going to have a much longer season if we have a thicker piece of ice. And the curbs are going to be the thing that allow us to have a greater depth of ice along with the different boards.
Yeah, and there's no sense doing this. I mean, I struggle with this because I kind of go, okay, right now our ice season is about 3 months maybe. You know, we might be able to get a longer season. We're hope to get a longer season, and because of the number of visitors we're getting, we opened up, we had, the first weekend we had over 100 people. We were like, wow, you know, and ice is not that great this year. We're doing the best we can with what we have, but it could be better.
So a garage, Zamboni, a thicker sheet of ice, we can have a more resilient piece of ice. The minimum cost for mechanical indoor ice, 1.5 million?
Yeah, and I have a hard time supporting that, only because we've been down this road, like, I'm on my third time around on this. And we have 5,000 some people, even though I just don't know that we could support it. I've also talked to people who manage arenas. I have a brother-in-law who manages an arena in an area of a town that has $80,000, and he said they can't make their arena break even.
Well, arenas don't break even.
They
I mean,
don't.
Just the cost of building them is
Yeah.
one thing, and then their
Right.
operational
Exactly.
losses all year, every year. I mean, Fergus Falls, 15,000 people in a 60,000 person area, arenas cost public dollars every year to operate. So
So
I'm not
Diane-
recommending that either, I'm just throwing it out there in the context of upgrade the ice that we have for a couple $100,000 and provide for significantly better improved usage compared to something that probably doesn't fit here anyway.
Right. And we also have the kids coming over for PE classes, they come over and skate. We have broomball, we have a men's hockey group that comes in. I know that if we had a better facility, I happened to be working over the weekend on Saturday, and 9 or 10 people came in and went, "Oh, I wanted to rent skates, where do I go?" And I said, "Go over to the warming house behind." "Well, I couldn't find any, there's just an old shack back there."
That's it.
So I know that we would have a lot more use and a better use of that facility if we could upgrade it. And, you know, one of the things, it's one of the few things that kids can do cheaply, right? We rent skates for $1 a piece, or kids have their own skates. And it's hard for families who don't have a lot of money in this community. Downhill skiing is expensive, there's a lot of expensive sports. This
Well,
is
there's
something
posts on
kids.
social media for the last couple weeks since we got the ice in. Does anyone have skates for my kids? And then 10 people get on and go, they have skates.
Yeah.
So, okay, now on the warming house and our 500 different versions of the warming house that we've been talking about for 5 years.
10 years.
I've only been here 5. We talked about not just for skate rental. Are we now just gonna say that this is a warming house for skate rental and we're not talking other uses and having it open all year?
I think we could use it for other uses.
Okay.
I don't see any reason why people couldn't utilize it. I don't know that people would per se,
Right.
but it certainly
But we're
would
not
be
excluding that.
another possibility, depending upon how it gets set up. Yeah.
Well, Diane, you know I support this, and you can go a couple pages back in this packet, and you can look at the roof on the cardio room of the YMCA and understand that that was a cost-saving plan that we did that worked out really well. So I support us doing it right the first time, and I trust your recommendations, and I know that the reason why you're doing it is not because you want to spend the most money, but that you don't want to spend the money again in 2 years. So
Well,
you
and
have
we-
my support on this.
We have also talked about, you know, can we set this up so that we have a basement underneath? So if at some point people want to do plumbing to it, that might be an option. The other option we're looking at is on the end, having porta potties inside where there's heat or vault toilets. And we have an okay from the city to actually put in vault toilets if we would go in that direction. And I know that's probably not what a lot of people would like to see.
Better than
But-
nothing.
But it would certainly be better than what we have now, so. And I'm happy to answer any questions if people have questions.
I was wondering, Diane, since this is a new idea that came forth, has this been brought to the board, to the community?
Yes.
Okay.
We were actually, they were there at the last board. My board is so tired of going over the same thing over and over again, and that they're so excited about having a group of young people who have kids that are 0 to like 4, saying, we really want to have this for our kids and we're willing to help, you know. They're saying, whatever it takes, let's do this.
So they supported this?
They do, yeah.
So this, yes, this summary is a summary of the community center board support for adding this to the project and coming in and saying, okay, I know we asked for 2, now we're asking for 4.
And it
I'm
may
gonna,
be
I'm gonna
less.
hold somebody accountable for the $13. I'll throw it in.
Well,
Well,
it may
but
be
now there's
less
10 added in.
if we're lucky enough to get some grant funds. And you know me, if I can get money somewhere, I will.
And you can't get money until we say go ahead with this, so that you can tell them that there's money.
Well, I can go ahead with the playground portion. I just can't. And probably what we could do is say, okay, if you don't want to do the warming house now, let's move forward and at least get the concrete out and get the new boards up, and then we look in a couple of years again at the warming house. But I don't know if people will be that patient.
No, it needs
They've
to be
been
done.
patient a long time.
On an $8 million issue, if $200,000 might be right next year, it's right now. Just from a process standpoint.
What do we have for contingency on this?
Diane's put all the numbers together for this project, and
I included a contingency.
I know you do. Okay.
I always do.
I know.
And I will say, this is how much you guys have, let's work with this amount, and if it comes in under, let's figure out a way to do that.
Okay.
I'm looking to this new hockey association to do some volunteering. I mean, everything that we've done at the community center has been a volunteer effort. Put your money where your mouth is, put your labor where your mouth is. I think it's really important that we have community buy-in somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just like to speak that, I was involved in hockey rinks where I lived, and we had some in the city, and they weren't done right, and others were done right, and we really knew the difference that if you do it right to begin with, it just makes a whole lot of sense. And I think we have to, make sure that when we use this money, that we use it wisely. And so sometimes cheapest is not the best way to go. And if you look at something, community involvement and the ice rinks are really a tradition. I think it's good for people to be out and doing them. And if we can extend that season, all the more reason to do it.
I would like to see the group of people, the new group, come to the county board and present something to us. I'm for
The
it.
Cook County Hockey
I'd
Association?
like to put some faces to it.
Absolutely, I can certainly ask them to do that, to come and talk about their association and what their plans are. I think where their plans are this year is their kids are pretty young, so they're kind of looking at next year. If we can get this facility, they will definitely start doing something. But yeah, I can certainly ask them to do that.
can we possibly bring them next week?
I'll put it on my schedule to say, okay, guys, let's do this.
But the truth of the matter, backing up to the process, is we don't have to, this is the list we're working off of, but the actual final issuance of debt is back in April. So we have a whole bunch of time still to refine our numbers again. The process will be to issue debt not to exceed whatever this list is when you create that.
I don't think that's where I was going with that. I was going with, I'd like to have them come and present to us and
I was.
so I can get a feel for it.
I'm just trying to think about the schedule. Do we need to do it next week? Could we do it the first week in February? And either one would probably work.
Whatever works. You give me a date and I'll go after them and say, okay, we need to come. And I'll ask my board members too, if you're interested in what they might have to say. But you also need.
Next week, that'd be great.
Yeah, you also need to remember that there's a lot of skating going on that's not associated with the hockey.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they are, and I have to
Yeah.
remind them that they're not in charge of everything.
Exactly.
Because they like to think then that they can decide everything. And so, but they're one faction of a group of people. We've had also broomball people in the past. We haven't
The
had for the
Hockey
last.
Association's putting money in.
Right. Yep.
You had a question?
Yes, I did. There are so many things we do in town and in the county that affect smaller groups of people. Mike is familiar with the tennis courts, and they have raised money. Their group has raised money. It seems to me that when you've got a smaller, more focused group, that if you can get the enthusiasm of that group together to try and have fundraising things, which really would bring money in to support what they want to do. There's a whole bunch of people that don't want to do these things. So if we're going to do something that affects the taxpayers, we also should have the support of the people who are benefiting from this in trying to support it financially. However, I mean, communities have been very successful in doing some of these things. Now, I know that Cook County's population is very small, but still in all, if you want to have special things for special people, you need to look at it a little differently.
So the special group is donating money to this? Do you want the other groups to also donate? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know how you would go about doing it, but I think if a group of people really want something, they have to be part of supporting that in whatever way they can
So
to make it functionable.
So the Hockey Association is putting money in.
Okay.
But there's other groups, is that what
There
you're
are
saying?
other
You
groups,
want the
yes.
other groups
Yeah.
involved? Okay.
So,
That's what I was
They
getting
could
at.
come together as a force and work together, but it's for supporting this one area, the hockey rink, the playgrounds and all that. So it seems to me you have to get some general support to make it feasible to do all this.
Yeah, they're already putting money in, over 10%,
Okay, you're talking about one part of the group.
the Hockey Association.
Yeah,
Yep,
but they aren't the only people who
There's-
are using.
right.
There's a significant analogy here.
I'm sorry.
I never drive on the Arrowhead Trail, so I could say, why do you spend money plowing and redeveloping the Arrowhead Trail? The board is tasked with creating community, they're tasked with creating sustainable community and infrastructure, and not everybody golfs, and not everybody plays tennis, and not everybody goes to the YMCA, and not everybody's gonna skate. Yet all of those things are important to us having a community that people like to live in and visit. And that, this competing resources thing is the biggest issue that the commissioners have to consider and think about. And they do. And each one of them have their own individual perspective, and each one of them have their own things that they're interested in doing.
I no longer have interest because I have 32 committees.
But that's, but it is, you know, you do, I had a conversation with my grandfather about 6 months before he died. He says, he lived in Columbia Heights, why is Columbia Heights spending money on parks? Why are they spending money on parks? I said, Grandpa, because if they don't spend money on parks and Fridley does, then everybody's gonna move to Fridley and you're gonna be left with the slum of North Minneapolis. And he said, great, I'm voting in favor of quality of life because I want this to be a place that is good for families to be in. He didn't understand, he literally didn't understand. He watches the news all the time. He followed my career. He said, why are you doing these things? And I said, this is why you support economic development. Because economic development adds to quality of life. And it doesn't add individually to anybody's quality of life, but it impacts, I would say the $300,000 that we invest in levy in the EDA every year is a very, very, very small investment for the opportunity they're creating, you know, to bring in millions of dollars to produce some housing projects over the next couple of years. And if we don't factor quality of life in, then the process that we're doing is we're just cutting services until there's nothing left. And then only the people who can pay their full share are the only ones that are going to have access to everything.
Well, and if I might answer your question, so you know that the Hockey Association is putting forth $32,000. We also have a big donation jar in our warming house that says, we are planning on building a new warming house, please donate. And we're getting, we had a $20 bill on there the other day. So we're trying to raise money that way. And that kind of brings in the visitors, that brings in some of the other skaters. Now, the little kids, we're not gonna ask them for money that are out there that are 8 and, you know, we're not gonna do that. But the other thing, if I can say, is, you know, we're putting in a 0 to 5 playground fenced-in area, which is new because there's been a big request for that from all the child care providers, and we have a lot more young families now with small children. I just finished a grant yesterday and sent it in to Lloyd K. Johnson. I'm asking them to pay for that, putting $46,000 in exchange for having their name on it. So we're trying very hard to get other groups and people to help support some of those things beyond the taxpayers.
Well, I think my point was that we've been involved with the Bali Museum,
Blacksmith shop?
The blacksmith shop, thank you. And we went about it by having a challenge, a matching funds challenge, and raised a great deal of money. But you have to do something that's a little creative and to put out there to people so they know that you need money and what you need that money for, and to make it kind of interesting to be part of it.
And here, there has to be, if there wasn't significant community support for it, we would be doing something different. We've changed the scale of this, as Diane just represented, because there's significant group who's willing to put up some money
Right.
and to provide some labor going forward.
Okay.
You know, just recently in the newspaper, we had the issue related to whether or not there was interest in having the county work with agencies to find money to restore the Hovland Dock, and people said, no, we don't have any public support for this. So we put that project away. This project has, you know, we've got dedicated money to replace something that was done inappropriately. We have significant community support for it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things have to come together before money gets allocated for it.
And
Well,
young,
I'm not-
young families are an endangered species in Cook County. They're a severely endangered species in Cook County, and they don't necessarily have the money to put in themselves. But I think as a culture, as a community, if we don't support young families and provide an environment for them where they want to live here, we're really going to be in tough shape in a few years.
I agree with you wholly,
Yeah.
but Cook County has a lot of people with money. And I
Right.
think there are those who would be happy to do things that
Good
are
idea.
supportive of our young people. So,
Good idea.
Well, that kind of goes with that statement, where there's a will, there's a way. Technically, you want to change that statement to where there's a will, we want to be in it. So if you got.
Not everybody.
I didn't get it at first.
Well, I mean, it's kind of true. I mean, there is people here with money that I think if they understood better that there was a need, that they would
Yeah.
write some of that stuff
you.
into a will.
Yeah.
And that should be, in some of these, not everything, but in particular, things like this, especially our community center, our motto should be, if there's a will, we want to be in it.
Well, and I think you have to put this out for people. I think people are good and they're giving in many ways, and sometimes all it takes is a challenge. We can't be everything to everybody, but we can work very hard to try and make it possible.
There have been a lot of groups that have been working for years to try and come up with the funding because they've been told no by the county board for as long as I've been here, and we haven't raised the money. We need to decide as commissioners if this is important enough for us to stop begging the community to pay for it for us and to do it.
So you'll check with the group and see if they can come up to one of the next
I
two
will.
meetings?
Yes.
And if we would have a drawing, I think the site plan that shows where this is, you have a modified one of those, don't you?
I have a lot of them,
Yeah.
a lot of different ones.
Yeah,
They
15
keep
years
changing
worth.
daily.
Couple of them had a drinking fountain.
It's just sitting in the garage somewhere.
And support that.
Sorry for bringing that up.
But I think you have a very good point, and I would not be opposed once we get my board back together and say, okay, my board could take on, let's do a public meeting, let's raise some funds. I wouldn't have a problem doing that whatsoever. I think for us, it's kind of like saying, let's get our ducks in a row, let's make sure we have some funding, and then if we can change that and reduce it by getting some donations, I'm all for it.
You have a very big job already, I know that.
So what's one more thing then?
Hey, Diane, you could easily say, right now, we have this plan for a not heated warming house. This is the cost to heat it. If that's important to you.
And for septic, another $250,000 on top of that, sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, good comments, thank you.
Now you see why I picked her in the toe-to-toe of the parking lot. I know, I want to be honest.
It's an inside joke. It might be pretty obvious, actually.
When you said let's have a drawing, I was thinking, great, now we're gonna start a gambling.
I thought you'd start drawing it.
Yeah.
So the next item is the Hovland shop, the highway shop or public works facility. And the 845 is a budget number. You'll see it's on the next page. It came from work that Dave Betts had done. And through conversation with the Highway Advisory Committee, I've been talking to a representative from Morton Buildings, and we're talking about a design build and finding a way to actually do this. As came out and, I can't remember where it came out, but somebody actually called Lisa over at the highway department and said $845,000 for a garage is too much. It's not just a garage. It's a garage, it's the infrastructure, it's the concrete, it's the removal of the old existing place. It's site work, it's all of those things lumped into one number that isn't broken out very well here. So we have work to do to narrow that focus on that, and we're doing it. So we'll figure out what that number is, but everybody's estimation is that there's really nothing else to do to extend the life of that facility. That it does need to be replaced. We need to do something with our salt sand right there now. Our salt is stored right next to a wetland, so it's just leaching off into the water, which isn't something anybody else wants to see there.
Are you looking for a different site?
No,
Or keep it at the same site?
Yeah.
Just-
not at this point. We think we have enough room there to do that. We did at one point talk with the state of Minnesota about possibly using some of the additional right-of-way that they have. They own that little tiny sliver going down to the highway there. But I don't know that it gave us any developable or any usable property. We did look at it at one point, but
It's high ground, so.
it is high ground. But it gets narrow real quick, so
Yeah.
that it just doesn't work out to be someplace you can drive a truck or back up a truck in a very useful fashion. So we're working on narrowing that down. I got a call from a gentleman today and didn't have a chance to return his call, but he's supposed to come out and walk the site with us and do some more estimating. We talked about really reducing the cost of this. If we just do design build with somebody like that, it would be probably significantly less.
I think we should have some choices in terms of a few estimates. So that's what I would be looking at.
Well, design build, we'll get at least, we'll have at least two different
Right,
numbers.
at
on it,
least,
but
right.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, we can't force people to give us an estimate if they don't want to.
Well, no. But they need to know that there's a chance to do this.
Right, that's what we do on every
Yeah.
project.
Mhm. But we've had some past experiences with some pretty bad situations, so I think this, we want to make sure that when we get the estimates on this, that it's reasonable and maybe local, who knows?
Oh. Let's go with qualified.
We'll put an ad in the local paper. Anybody that has has a desire to bid will have the opportunity to bid. And this is the type of project that maybe somebody would have the capacity to take on, but it's not gonna pay like the $840,000 house project pays. The next item, the general maintenance, you can see the summary below. Commissioner DeShaw specifically asked that we represent what we thought we needed in the town halls. You'll see the last page in this booklet is the letter that I received from Arvis Thompson a while ago. Lighting upgrades are split between the highway department, the shop, and the Goble building, and in the community center, the town halls, other items, meaning looking at trying to take the projects that Brian has planned for this year and roll them into the financing of this, so we can take the cash that's been allocated in this year's budget to use it for repairs that wouldn't qualify for this type of financing, so that we don't have to dip into fund balance. One of the big challenges we have is the school's gonna be doing a major roof repair, and if we don't pay to redo the sections of the roof over the YMCA that are our responsibilities, then we're basically saying we want the roof to leak. You don't do 3/4 of a roof, you have to do the whole roof when it's being mobilized and being done. Yeah.
That building's only been up for a few years. Why was this?
I'm sorry, the new building has only been up for a few years, but a
Yeah.
significant portion of the building in the middle,
Oh, the old high school?
the old high school, is
I'm
what
sorry.
needs to be done and what's leaking. Above the old cardio room, above the daycare areas, those are the spaces that are between the new building and the school,
Okay.
that are our responsibility, that we're talking about needing to do some roof work on.
Okay,
And
thank
the
you.
stuff that's up there is more than 20 years old.
Yeah.
And if we stop right there, we're just asking for those places to continue to leak badly. We're not doing anything with the new building yet.
Okay.
Thank you. Good clarifying question. Why would we be redoing a roof after 3 years? We're not. So that's part of the challenge, is that doesn't qualify for this type of funding because it's a recreational facility. Also, there's the town halls are typically not used for governance process. You know, we don't, they're used a lot for social activities. They may not qualify for this type of funding either. So we're gonna have to do our diligence and take a look at this. That's why I'm separated them out, and I've showed the 100,000 up there, and I'm showing them down here, but we have to work with our bond council to find out which of our current listed items qualify for this type of financing, and then which other projects, if we finance those, which other projects that we pay cash that we've already allocated in 2018 for projects. Now, we allocated $25,000 for maintenance projects throughout the county for 2018, and $5,000 for capital purchases in our maintenance department. We're gonna find out very shortly that we're significantly underfunding our facilities. And right now, we're having to bond for these things because we don't have a fund to pay for these things. The energy audit we did with the YMCA a couple of years ago suggested that if we put aside $25,000 to $35,000 a year, that when we need a new HVAC upgrade in 15 or 20 years, we'd have the cash to do that. That's how people plan for things. You want a new car, you can either finance it or you can save for it and buy it. Local government has to do a combination of those things because of the timing, the urgency, the availability, the good cost of money over the past several of years. Are all things we have to take into account, but we're not entirely sure what of this $100,000 would potentially qualify to go into this type of funding. But we're gonna work with Brian to identify the things that we're planning on doing that would qualify for this type of funding, to maybe free up some money to do some of these other projects that don't, if that makes sense. Otherwise, some of these projects may have to get rolled into a 2019, and I'm answering Arvis's question. We haven't budgeted for it, and until we do, we have a hard time doing it. So.
Yeah, the bonding is pretty specific to the capital improvement plan. It's specifically government buildings, government use, so it's gonna have to qualify into that.
And there are other financing tools, and maybe the next one we look at is a different tool that has a less restrictive scope. But until we create this plan, we don't even know what our needs are. So we're getting closer. We know what a lot of our needs are. And again, when we look at the fact that out of 8.4 million, 6.3 is roads, we know that we're not talking about a whole lot of other money. We're talking primarily about some basic facility needs that we've been deferring for a number of years. The equipment portion, those are the things we've been talking about, the updating the pictometry, the sheriff's squad computers, the new MDUs, is that what they are? Mobile MDCs, mobile dispatch computers. They go along with the Zucker 911 as an upgrade to our infrastructure that we're using for dispatch and for communication between our law enforcement and our dispatch. And we're doing it in conjunction with the regional counties. So we're sharing some of the cost on this. But that $194,000 is to upgrade the cost of what it takes to operate a law enforcement center and meet our requirements with that.
And the equipment bond is much simpler, and it's easy to substitute if something doesn't cost as much. We'll already have the funding if we bond for $399, but if we don't need the $205 for pictometry, we can spend it on other equipment as long as it fits the statute, public safety or highway equipment. we did that on the current equipment bond that we're paying off right now. So that's going to be bonded with the CIP, but it's just a much easier way to bond.
And the only reason that changed, the number for the pictometry cost might change again is we're still working on contracts with other partner agencies. A lot of their contracts are buying higher resolution shots from their own, within their jurisdictions, but some of it does then help to buy down the cost of this. So that's what those numbers are.
Anything else?
So Brady, when the community center rents out to community members, they collect the money that goes in our budget. When the town halls rent out to community members, is there money collected? Is that
We don't see any of that.
interesting?
So it's primarily operations that, no, buildings and so.
I don't have much control or knowledge of
I
what
think we-
commissioners typically do. but
Well, If it's a county
It
building
doesn't come through.
and we do it at the community center, maybe we need to look at it at our town halls. Like the public said, if the community wants to use something, they'd be willing to pay to help us fix it. Since I didn't get much support on my sell it, when you have a piece of junk car, you sell it.
Well, one of the things that we're doing with the jail study is, and Commissioner Bershheim's going to be on this committee and seeing this through, so remind me when we need to give updates at the board meetings. But we're starting by backing up and looking at all of our facilities and all of our programs, and the programs, I mean the departments. So the consultant is going to interview all of our department heads and talk about the number of staff they have, the organizational chart, the mission, the services they provide, the amount of space they're allocated, and they're going to help us come up with some, they asked, do we have a best practice or a set of standards for the size of a workstation for this level employee, this level employee, this level employee, and we don't yet. So we simply said, use some best practices, plug in some assumptions, we'll review them and move forward. But I have a feeling when we're gonna identify some challenges and some opportunities, and they wanna make sure that whatever recommendation they make related to program or facility for law enforcement, that it helps us to make better decisions with the rest of our program and the rest of our facilities. So we'll, just to give an example, because that sounds kind of cryptic, if there were a need to create a justice center where we actually took the courts and the attorney's office and probation and combined them with the jail, so that for the efficiency's sake, for the security's sake, everything that's happening at that level was in one place, then we've got 2 and 3 people officing in the same office in our Health and Human Services up here. If we freed up 2/3 of the second floor of this building, we wouldn't have a space constraint in the courthouse. Alternatively, a lot of people have taken their Health and Human Services staff and moved them out of the main courtroom area and put them in an office space that's more appropriate, that's easier to manage, that works for the type of service they're providing. There was an argument at our last meeting that people who are coming in for social services sometimes have this anxiety. They don't want to come into the same place that the courtroom is, right? There's all of these considerations. So as we're doing this study, we want to make sure that we think about all of our needs. If we were to resize and look at the footprint for the community center and add 8,500 square feet to a second building at the community center to house Health and Human Services and the Veteran Service Office and our Emergency Management Office, we could put that all flat on here, because then that would be complete government functions. But would that be the right thing to do? We don't know, because we haven't asked those questions yet. So when I'm throwing these ideas out there, it's just to throw out examples of things we have to take into account to have a good 10, 20, 25-year facility plan. And our consultant that's looking at our jail needs wants to take a look at that before he starts too far down the road of making recommendations about what we ought to do with our law enforcement center.
It's not just public health. People don't want to walk through a scanner to pay their property tax.
We've identified we have a problem because we have a need for enhanced security in one portion of this building and we have a need for public access in another portion of this building. And having those competing interests means, you know, on what day do I have to walk through the scanner and what day don't I have to walk through the scanner? And that's tough for public to understand as well.
You could just put a flashing light outside, scanner on.
Yeah.
I'd like to respond to that if I could. The one incident that really put the fear of God in everybody created an overreaction to where this little town with this little courthouse has to be like we're in the middle of LA. And I think most of us don't understand the need. You can get hit by a car crossing the street and you thought, you know, there was no problem. But you can't prepare for everything. To spend thousands of dollars to set up a situation where you put your purse through a scanner and you get, it's just, a lot of us thought that was beyond necessary. And I still feel it is. We are not a big city and you can't prepare for every single situation that's gonna come along. And this throwing money out of fear just blows my mind. I do not understand this mindset.
On a very personal basis, I agree with you completely.
I can't hear you.
On a very personal basis, I agree with you completely. On a very practical basis, because we house the 6th district judge up here, that's all because of that office.
I'm sorry, what?
The requirement for all that security is because we have a 6th district judge who is a state employee.
The judge gets to say, you have to protect me.
Oh, my God, okay.
And the biggest reason for that is because we have the 6th district judge in the same building.
And he is the one that declared that, or the law declared?
The court system.
Okay.
I was actually here during those discussions. And you say Los Angeles, there is a system, an impartial system that measures the safety of your facility. And we are probably less safe than Los Angeles because we border another country. We have a low number of law enforcement. So part of why we got funding to help us pay for that is because on paper, we look very scary.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
I mean,
sorry.
I know it seems silly, but it helped us to fund it, but it also, when people are looking at things and they're saying, are you safe or not? They're not us, they don't live here. They don't know. And the other thing when I talk to people is, this wasn't a guy from another country who came here. This was somebody born and raised here.
That's right.
So, I mean, there's reasons we do things and it may seem silly, but there's reasons why we do it. Nobody would have ever in a million years thought that would happen.
As a commissioner coming in on work schedules, whether it be the board or whatever it is, I'm very glad that we go through security because I feel safer during that period of time that we have public meetings.
We've been threatened. We as commissioners have been threatened.
Really?
Yes. No joke. At a public meeting. Jenny, you were probably at the meeting.
Well, and I apologize. I'm not aware of that. But it just seemed like overkill. Just,
It affects every courthouse in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And it came down from the legislature that we are allowed a certain amount of money for safety.
and that happened after this situation?
It was a process probably that was ongoing, but
Oh,
that
okay.
situation heightened it,
Okay.
yes.
Mhm.
Right.
Thank you for that.
Okay, well, I thank you for coming. And that's the whole purpose of our 5 o'clock meeting.
Thank you.
We're not putting time restrictions on it, but this is good timing
Right.
for 2 hours.
It's time for a meal. Thank you all.
Thanks for coming.
It was
Oh, yeah.
very nice. Did we overstep your kindness in joining in the conversation?
Oh,
Here,
yeah.
put it to vote.
Alright,
We're
listen.
trying to.
Okay, I'm right here.
I
Yeah,
think this is
it's
so
very
important.
helpful.
As long as it, I guess